conflict. It's the thing that keeps you up at night, losing sleep as you replay every interaction in your head with that toxic coworker or that boss who just doesn't appreciate you. Conflict is when you might break up because you and your partner keep having the same fights over and over. Or maybe you're the kind of person who will do anything to avoid conflict, but end up resentful or disconnected from the people who matter most. Or you embrace conflict only to find that other people find you kind of hard to take. The truth is, if you don't understand conflict, you could destroy your career, damage your relationships, harm your health, or even lose your life. And you miss out on incredible opportunities to get stronger, smarter, and more successful. But I have something to say that might surprise you. It's not conflict that's the problem. It's the way that you handle it. According to the Society of Human Resource Management, it's estimated that US businesses are losing $2.7 billion a day due to mismanaged conflict and incivility. Most of it due to differences over social issues or politics. $2.7 billion a day. Your instincts about how to handle most kinds of conflict are probably wrong. In really dysfunctional conflict, any intuitive thing you do will make the conflict worse. So you literally have to do counterintuitive things, which requires practice. You can't just improv your way through it. That's why we're here. This class will teach you how to successfully navigate conflict at work and at home. You'll learn how to stop workplace conflicts from destroying your career, deal with toxic people, have difficult conversations, and be satisfied with the outcome. Spot the most dangerous people in any conflict and handle them before they handle you. After taking this class, I hope that you will be less afraid of conflict, less resistant to it, and more open to learning what it has to teach you. You can't stop conflict, but you can stop it from hurting your career and your life. I'm going to show you how. I'm Amanda Ripley, and this is Masterclass. For 20 years, I've been a journalist covering all kinds of conflict at Time Magazine, The Atlantic, The Washington Post. After the 2016 election, I felt like journalism was kind of broken. And it seemed like any story I might do about conflict in the normal ways was either going to make things worse or have no impact at all. So I ended up following people who understand conflict intimately, but very differently from journalists. People like gang violence interrupters, former guerrilla fighters, divorce lawyers who know a lot about conflict. And I learned that there was a lot about conflict I had not understood. And at first I just kept asking them, how do you get out of conflict? And they told me that's the wrong question. We need conflict. That's how we get stronger. That's how we challenge each other. That was a real epiphany for me. And it led me to write High Conflict, which is all about how people shift out of really toxic, dysfunctional conflict into healthy conflict, whether it's political conflict or interpersonal conflict or workplace conflict or violent conflict. What were the steps that they took to make that shift? And how could all of us learn from that playbook? And the reaction was so positive that I ended up founding Good Conflict with a fellow journalist to help people understand conflict better and use it to their advantage. We work with school leaders, universities, Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, elected officials and their staff, all kinds of people who have to deal with a lot of conflict. Companies that have zero conflict also have zero innovation. The clash of ideas makes companies stronger because it allows real problems to surface. It gives people a way to deal with their frustrations in a healthy, productive way. And it allows people to be wrong. And it doesn't just apply to the workplace. It can strengthen your relationships, your family, your friends. The key to understanding conflict is not out there somewhere. It's in here. Most of us think that we're good listeners, but we're not. I know that I wasn't. I was interviewing people for more than 10 years before I discovered that I was doing it wrong. I was performing listening. I was doing the things that I thought made me look like I was listening, but often I was thinking about my next question or whether the person was saying something that I could use in a story or when I would get to have lunch. The research shows people consistently rank AI chatbots as better listeners than humans. This is a big problem, and it doesn't mean that we should just outsource listening to chatbots. It means that we need to get better at listening. We're mimicking the behavior of listening. We're nodding at the right moments, we're furrowing our brows, we're laughing when appropriate. But here's the thing, that's not listening, and people can tell. The real way to prove you're listening is through your words, because you can't fake that. The way to do that is to listen for what seems most important to the other person when they're talking. Not to you, but to them. And then distill it into the most elegant words you can come up with, and then play it back to them and check if you got it right. It is extremely helpful. I use it every day when I'm talking to friends, family, when anyone's telling me something that's important to them. I use it in every interview I do as a journalist, just to make sure I'm understanding people and to build connection and trust. And that way, when I am in conflict, I can use it automatically without thinking. Because guess what? People almost never feel heard. The reason it's so important to listen in ways people can see and trust is because it allows us to start to glimpse the understory of the conflict. And the most important thing is that as we start to peel the onion and understand what is the understory here, what are we really fighting about, then we can have that fight. We can really talk about the thing under the thing instead of getting sucked into other tangential arguments that really aren't that important. At work, any kind of turf battles, power struggles, petty feuds, usually that's because we're not really getting to the understory. Maybe people are feeling disrespected, whether they should or not. But that's really important to talk about, as opposed to just fighting about who said what to whom, or even more often, refusing to talk about it. We need to get to the thing driving the conflict, which is usually respect and recognition, power and control, care and concern, or stress and overwhelm. If you don't get to the understory of a conflict, you're doomed to repeat it. You end up having a bunch of nonsense fights and never having the fight you really do need to have, the one that can make you stronger and even closer. Looping is the best way I know of to identify the understory. And without that, you will never have healthy conflict. Looping was developed by the Center for Understanding in Conflict to help people who were in really ugly conflict learn to really listen to each other and to prove to each other that they were listening. The reason that looping helps us get to the understory is that, first of all, it slows down the conflict so that we don't say things we regret. And it also helps us literally understand the other person. We often misunderstand what people mean, partly because they don't tell us right away. It also shows the other person that even as you disagree, you're trying to understand them. And that is no small thing. There are 3 critical steps to looping. First, you want to listen for what seems most important to the other person. What are they really trying to tell you? What words do they repeat? What metaphors do they use? That's how you know. Then you take what you've heard and put it into the most elegant language you can come up with, your own words, not theirs. Then you play it back to them, and then, this is the step most people forget at first, you check to see if you got it right. It's amazing the effect it has on people. All of a sudden, you can see their shoulders drop. They are so relieved that someone is trying to understand them. Sometimes when you tell them what you heard, they'll realize you're helping them figure out what they really mean to say. And together, you're kind of co-creating the conversation and coming to some kind of truth that's closer than if it's just a tennis match with the ball being lobbed back and forth and you're each speaking past each other. An example of looping gone wrong might look something like this. Let's say someone brings a complaint to their colleague about something, and the colleague maybe feels defensive and jumps in and explains or excuses their behavior with information that they feel that other person doesn't have. Very quickly, you've already made a mistake, which is that person doesn't feel heard, the person who came with the complaint. So now they feel like they need to get louder. So they now aren't listening to you. So now we're really talking in the same language, but not understanding each other. If you took just one beat, not forever, but one beat, to try to put what you heard into your own words, check if you got it right, then what you find is the other person might be able to listen to you. But if you skip that step, if you go right to defending yourself or arguing back, that is skipping the most important step. People will not listen until they feel heard. It's like a game of chicken. Who is going to listen first? We were working with an executive at a small organization whose staff was trying to unionize. The employee said to her, "We demand to have a seat at the table, and we want to be part of the decisions about who gets hired at this place and what our mission is." And she said, "That's not how unions work. Have you actually read the law?" Now, she was right on the facts, but what that did was just escalate the us versus them thinking. Eventually, through looping, she managed to release her grip on the facts and try to just let them talk and prove that she was hearing them, even as she disagreed. She summarized what they said in her own words and checked if she got it right. At no point did she say, "Yes, I agree." But when people first learn to loop, they feel like it's dangerous. Like maybe the other person's gonna think they agree. And that's not the case. Like, people know the difference, but they do feel heard. And what she found is, you know what? Over time, these meetings, she would go and no one would be there. The desire to form the union in this case kind of faded. That's not always the case, nor is it always the desired outcome, right? But what people seemed to really need was to feel heard. And once she could give them that, they could let go of other things. Looping is a powerful way to connect with friends and family too. So your spouse comes home and at dinner they're telling you how, they just have way too much to do and they got pulled into this meeting that lasted twice as long as they expected and just made them feel like they didn't matter. Okay, that's key. They've told you something important. And so that's when you say, "Oh, wow, you felt like you just were totally steamrolled. Is that right?" Or you felt like kind of invisible, and you say it like a question. And then what that does is, you might be wrong, and that's okay. And they'll be like, "No, I don't feel invisible. I just feel like my schedule doesn't matter to people." And now you try it again. You loop them again, right? And so you say, "Oh, okay, so it's not like you're invisible, but it's more like your priorities matter less than theirs." Is that right? You're trying to get to some version of the truth that resonates. Usually when you get it right, they'll be like, "Yeah, exactly." You should use looping every day. You shouldn't just use it in conflict. Like, that's how you get good at it, when you've practiced it a lot in low stakes settings, when you're calm enough to actually truly listen and not just pretend like you're listening, when you're ready to be surprised, even in a small way, when you realize that you might know a lot, but you just don't know everything about this person or the conflict. Looping is the best way that I know of to get to the understory. But the understory that might be most important is your own. Your own understory is the one that most of us overlook. It might be like job one in conflict. Why am I feeling this way? What is going on for me? Is it about respect? Is it about power? Is it about care? Is it about stress? Sometimes I'll be just unreasonably upset, and it's like something simple, like I didn't sleep much last night and I haven't had coffee. And other times it's much deeper, right? It's like, oh, this is a recurring conflict that I've had over and over. So this is like partly my baggage. Like, I know I have an issue when I don't feel heard. Like, that goes way back for me since I was a baby, right? But knowing that means I'm not as easily trapped by my reaction. Like, when I don't feel heard, I'm a little bit less likely to believe everything that I think because I know, oh, this is a thing. I'm familiar with this. It doesn't mean that there's an existential threat. If you're having an outsized reaction to any conflict, the most important thing you can start with is to ask yourself, what is the understory here for me? What is this really about? Let me give you an example. A friend recently shared with me that her youngest daughter, after she'd left for college, had come home with a nose ring. My friend did not respond well, and the daughter was hurt. And later she realized, why did I respond that way? And she realized it was less about the nose ring and more about that she hadn't been consulted. She felt suddenly like irrelevant because all her kids were gone and they were making big decisions in her mind in permanent ways without even bringing her in the loop. And that hurt, even though like she was fine with the nose ring. And so to her credit, she went back to her daughter and told her this. So that's a good example of like showing some vulnerability actually helped her daughter understand, not only repaired the relationship, but they were closer afterwards. There's so much we can't control in conflict and all of life. It's really important to focus on what we can control, which is our own contribution to the conflict. Sometimes it's that we've failed to really speak up about something for years, and that's facilitated bad behavior on someone else's part. And maybe they own 99% of the conflict, but the 1%, that's what we can change. And it won't fix everything. It won't necessarily change their behavior, but it will have ripple effects on the conflict. The first 5 minutes in a conflict are crucial. As soon as you start to feel maybe it's a knot in your stomach or your heart rate accelerates, or you notice that the other person suddenly seems animated in a way that they weren't before, that's when you have your best shot at slowing the conflict down. You want to step back and say, let me make sure I'm understanding you. Is this what you mean? Is that right? And summarize it in your own words. And that's a very good way to slow the conflict down without having to think too much under pressure. Most of us want conflict to be stamped out or preempted because it's unpleasant, but that's not going to work. Here are some things you can do in those first 5 minutes. If you're in a group situation, like in a meeting or social media, you want to, first thing, try to shift to one-on-one, remove the audience. You want to remove the audience because it's much harder to humiliate people if no one's watching. Buy time. Try to slow the conflict down so you can access your higher self, and so can they. It might mean taking a walk instead of continuing the fight, getting your mind out of that marinade of anger and frustration just for a little bit. One of the worst pieces of relationship advice I've ever gotten is to not go to bed angry. 100% you should go to bed angry. Like, trying to fight to the bitter end when you're both tired at midnight is a very bad idea. It's better to take a break and come to the same thing fresh. You know you'll be a different person. Control the medium. You do not want to have a fraught conversation over email, Slack, text message, anything like that. DMs, don't do it. It is so easy to be misunderstood, even when you're in person. But fighting with someone over text is like fighting with one hand behind your back. The first thing you want to do is to try to take it off of text. And you know that you should do this when you feel any amount of agitation, that sort of rush of like, how dare they? Or do they know? Or how could they? Or, oh my God, those feelings are like red alerts to not hit reply all. Let's say a disagreement erupts during a team meeting. In the first 5 minutes, you want to figure out how you can slow this down, make sure it's okay to keep the audience, or is the audience going to lead to a sense of embarrassment that'll make the conflict worse? See if you can summarize what each person seems to be saying and check if you got it right. What if your boss humiliates you in public? That's a terrible feeling. Probably your in-the-moment response is not going to be the best response. So you're going to want to wait and come back to this one-on-one with that boss in a way that you're prepared for. I have found that sometimes the best thing to do is just acknowledge that you're taken aback. Sometimes just revealing how that landed for you can be enough. If someone humiliates you, as satisfying as it might feel to humiliate them right back, it will tend to make things worse. Being strategic about how you respond in those first 5 minutes doesn't mean you're backing down or letting someone roll over you. To the contrary, it means you're being smart and thoughtful so that you don't make a decision you're gonna regret. Whatever it is you want, you increase your odds if you can have the conversation one-on-one, not over text message, and when you're in a calmer state of mind. This is a way to get what you want, not a way to surrender what you hold dear. There are 4 conflict personality types that I encounter the most often. You have the avoider, the mediator or the peacemaker, the fighter, or the conflict entrepreneur. There's 2 reasons to understand these personality types. The first is to recognize which is your comfort zone, which one you most closely align with. And the second is to understand who you're dealing with when you're in conflict, because there's a different playbook for each conflict personality. None of us is just one type or another. It really depends on the context. Like, you might be a peacemaker at work, but a fighter on social media. Or you might be avoidant at home, but a mediator at work. Usually there's 1 or 2 that we are most comfortable with, because that's what we learned to do as kids. And that worked for us in some way. And it may or may not work now. Avoiders are generally very, very uncomfortable in conflict. They're a little bit allergic to it. And most people, I would say, are somewhat avoidant in most cases. And that is a pretty good survival technique, honestly. When they encounter tension or friction or conflict, they either literally walk away or just agree or get quiet and hope it goes away. If you ignore toxic situations, they don't go away, and the residue stays with you. If you tend to be avoidant and you want to change, start small. So if what you want to do is be more comfortable in serious conflict, start with very unserious conflict. Like, if your friend says they want to have pizza and you want to have Thai food, and usually you would just go with pizza, this is your moment to be like, you know what? I had pizza yesterday. Let's do Thai. Sometimes exposure is the only good treatment. You want to expose yourself in small, safe ways to conflict and build up the muscles to help you deal with more serious conflict. About 53% of employees say they handle toxic situations at work by ignoring them. At work, avoidance can mean that people think you agree when you really don't, and you will slowly come to resent that. You can be overlooked or seen as really passive when maybe you're not. Let's say somebody moves up a timeline and they act like it was always that timeline, and you're gonna just go with it, but you're actually inside pretty frustrated. All you have to do, and please try to do this on the phone or in person, is say to them, you know what? I'm confused because I thought the deadline was X, and now you're saying it's Y. Help me understand. That is a way to build the muscles you're gonna need in bigger conflict. If you're dealing with someone at work who is an avoider, you want to be aware it's going to be really, really hard for them to engage directly in conflict. So what do? Well, the first thing you do is, if you can catch them going into conflict, even in very small ways, you want to notice that and praise that. You want to recognize and reward anything they do that's outside of their comfort zone. With someone who's avoidant, you want to do everything you can to lower the stakes of conflict. Make everyday conflict normal. Make it something that you lean into. You can say something like, Oh, interesting, because I saw it totally differently. Tell me more. Like it lights you up as opposed to shutting you down. One way to lower the stakes with someone who is avoidant is to go first. Like you say the mistake you made, maybe you apologize if you can genuinely get there. You're trying to show that we're all human and it's okay. Life is messy. It's not a big deal. It's okay for us to disagree. It's okay for us to be wrong. It's okay. That friction is not a threat. I was recently working with a leader of a large organization, and she said it came as such a relief to her to realize that in a lot of conflicts, all she needed to do was to really make people feel heard and understood, even if they never got what they wanted. That's at least half of what people want. And avoidant people are no different. If you sense hesitation, disagreement, and it's going to be very small in someone who's avoidant, you really have to read the tea leaves. Then you want to really take a moment to encourage dissent, to say, I really want to hear any reason we might not want to go in this direction. Let's get it out now, right? Because if you don't do that now, it's going to fester. And in ways large or small, they may do things to undermine the project down the line. The peacemaker or the mediator is usually someone who tries to make conflict better in all kinds of ways. Maybe you were the comedian in your family, right? Maybe you made people laugh. Maybe you calmed people down. So you get very good at sensing trouble before it happens, being very aware of any kind of tension, and then trying to swoop in and make sure everybody's okay. In a lot of situations, that is brilliant. That is a wonderful way to move through the world, right? We need peacemakers. We need mediators, God knows. In some situations, though, it means you put your own feelings on the back burner, and it means you're not ever really standing up for what you care about. And eventually, that will come back to bite you. It also might mean that you take on more than you should, that you cannot fix everything. You cannot change people, sadly. It is not always yours to mediate, and you eventually will burn out on it. If you're a peacemaker type of person and it's not serving you in every situation, maybe there are things you realize you've gotten too entangled with family members who are struggling or colleagues who are clearly sabotaging their own career, and you're so frustrated but you can't fix it. This is when you have to realize that there's only so much you can do, and you have to start with yourself. Are you doing all the things that you can do? Are you speaking up for your own needs? Are you allowing there to be conflict in the room and being okay with that? Ask yourself, what do I need? And what can I control? And what can't I control? If you've been a mediator type, you may find that people come to you as a sort of referee and they start relying on you to fix all the things. At some point, you may decide that, you know what? It's not your job to fix all the things. That's what other people are for, and people need to fight their own battles. Remember, peace at any cost isn't peace. It's just postponement. Personally, I can relate to the fighter. Growing up as a kid in New Jersey, there was a lot of conflict in my house, and I leaned in. I was a little social justice warrior that nobody asked for in my family, and I felt like I was fighting for what was right. Fighters have a critical role in our society. We need them. Sometimes it's exactly what we need, and sometimes it can make conflict worse. The fighter comes alive in conflict. They feel like they know the answer, they know what is right. They are fighting for the cause of justice, sometimes for morality, good versus evil, and they're comfortable with that discomfort. And sometimes they actually enjoy it. In certain situations, that is awesome. That is exactly what we need. But in other situations, it can be a form of bullying. Like a lot of people go silent when the fighter enters the room. And so it doesn't always serve you in every conflict. At work, the fighter is usually really good with facts. They're very persuasive, and they know it. They're sharp, they're quick, they enjoy arguing. It gives them energy rather than taking it away. They get energized by disagreement. They want to win the fight. They want to prove their point, and it's very important for them to feel heard. If you're a fighter at work, it might look like you're winning. It might look like you're very successful, at least on the surface. But it turns out that people are holding a lot back from you. There's a lot they're not saying. There's a real limit to how far you can go. The fighter might get a lot of compliance, but rarely commitment. If you're a fighter and it's not working so well for you anymore, it's important to realize that there's hidden information in a conflict. Even if you're right on the facts, you're missing something you need to know underneath it. Getting curious about that, practicing the art of listening in a tactical way, can shift how you show up in conflict. Not so that you never fight or that you surrender your true beliefs. That's not going to happen, especially if you're a fighter at heart. But if you insist on dominating and winning the argument, you're never going to hear it until it's too late. There's an old saying that the biggest mistake in communication is thinking it happened. That's true for you too. You think you know the answer. I know the feeling, and it feels good. You don't. There's more here. See if you can figure out what it is. The most dangerous conflict personality type, by far, is the conflict entrepreneur. This is someone who inflames and excites conflict for their own ends. Sometimes it's for profit, but even more often it's for attention or a sense of power or sense that they belong. And it seems to energize them. They are the ones who always feel like they're a victim. They always feel humiliated. They are also often very good at recruiting allies for different reasons. Maybe they're charismatic, maybe they're compelling, so they can really do a lot of damage. Usually they have some kind of internal pain that they have not been willing or able to deal with, and they are spreading it around. They are addicted to revenge. No one who actually is a conflict entrepreneur feels like they are. It's always someone else. It's never them. It's really important to understand how conflict entrepreneurs work. If you try to deal with a conflict entrepreneur according to any of the usual rules or whatever feels intuitive, you will fail. You cannot beat them at their own game. There are two things that people tend to do when dealing with conflict entrepreneurs. Both are mistakes. The first is that they comply. They just roll over because this person seems really upset and maybe they're right. And the second is they try to beat them at their own game. So they call them out, they try to shame them, they try to fight fire with fire. Unfortunately, with conflict entrepreneurs, the normal rules of conflict don't apply. There are three things that you can do with a conflict entrepreneur that are counterintuitive and that usually work better. The first is distance yourself from them if you can. So if they're in your social media feed, unfollow. If they're your lawyer, find a new lawyer, right? It depends on the situation. Sometimes though, you can't distance yourself from them. So then what? Well, in that case, you want to find out what is underneath this? What is it they really want? So this means, counterintuitively, spending a little more time with them, not less. Just enough so you can figure out what's really underneath this. Another thing you can do is you can figure out what else do they care about. None of us is just one thing, and conflict entrepreneurs are more than one thing too. Maybe they care about which parking spot they get in the company parking lot. Maybe there's some other thing that you also can care about or at least give them. And it's important to figure out what that is so you can redirect some of their energy in that direction. A conflict entrepreneur at work, sometimes it's tricky to identify them at first because they will do things that can be very good and noble. The problem arises when it never ends. The conflict is what they want. That is what makes them come alive. In some cases, the best thing you can do is counsel them out of the job. You may need to fire them. Ideally, you don't want to go to war with them because conflict entrepreneurs tend to be very litigious. And so you want to do this with care, with anyone, but especially with a conflict entrepreneur. Now that we've gone over the 4 most common conflict personality types, you've probably identified which one is your type. Consider whether that's serving you today. And if you might want to shift just a little bit in one direction or another. I feel like I'm part fighter, part mediator. It really depends on whether I'm at work or at home or who I'm with, my mood, how much I've eaten for lunch. All of these things matter, right? So none of us is just one thing, but there's usually a default mode that we're most comfortable with. And that's what we want to question. Is that serving us? If it's not serving you in a certain situation, you might want to consider shifting just 10% in one direction or another. Let me give you an example of a fighter I know who shifted just 10%. Recently, she'd gotten an email that kind of rebuked her, and her boss was CC'd. She thought about just replying in kind and arguing the facts, and she was right on the facts, so why not? Well, she wanted to shift how she shows up in conflict. And so this time, instead, she went to the person directly, and she said, it really kind of hurt my feelings, that message. Can we talk about this? So she said something that made her just a little bit vulnerable, which is a shift from her usual fighter mode. And it was disarming, because usually when people show a little vulnerability, we feel like we can be vulnerable too. And that can change everything. And the end result was that the conflict didn't escalate, and they ended up a little more connected than they were before. Small moves made consistently can compound into something very significant. So now that we've identified the players, let's zoom out and look at the game of conflict itself. Specifically, the difference between conflict that's destructive and conflict that's productive. You know who knows a surprising amount about conflict? NASA. It turns out there's conflict on every space mission. In 1973, for example, on the Skylab 4 mission, the 3 astronauts arrived with a massive to-do list, and they weren't given enough time to acclimate to being in space, and things started to go wrong right away. First, one of them got sick. They didn't report it to ground control. Everything came to a head one day when, during their regularly scheduled daily briefing, ground control pinged the astronauts and got silence in response for a full 90-minute orbit. No response from the space station. Now, what had actually happened was the exhausted crew had simply lost track of who was supposed to be listening for ground control and made a mistake. But down on Earth, it kind of seemed like they had cut off all contact. Word got spread that there was some kind of mutiny happening in outer space. The lesson of this story is that conflict is inevitable. Avoiding it or trying to dominate it just makes things worse. It pressurizes the conflict, and then it can blow up or go sideways in ways you really can't anticipate. The best way to avoid dysfunctional conflict is to cultivate healthy, productive conflict on purpose in advance. High conflict is the kind of conflict that escalates to the point where it becomes us versus them, good versus evil. In this kind of conflict, we know from the research that we make a ton of mistakes. All of our usual cognitive biases get much worse. We start to believe that we are not just right, but morally superior, and the other side seems increasingly unreasonable. Soon, we start to think that the only answer is annihilation in one way or another, which is why high conflict is so dangerous. Every high conflict I have ever seen, from civil wars to gang violence to ugly divorces to dysfunctional workplace cultures, eventually, you start to harm the thing you went into the fight to protect, and you mimic the worst behavior of your opponents without even realizing it. High conflict is strangely addictive. It feels good, especially in a time of uncertainty or anxiety. It feels safer to be angry than to be afraid, to be contemptuous than to be wrong. If you don't understand high conflict, it will eventually come to get you. It will corrode and poison your relationships. It will limit your ability to thrive at work and at home, or it'll start to take a physical toll on you if you just hold it all inside. High conflict can manifest in a workplace when usually groups of people go to war, so to speak. Often they do it publicly, over social media, through anonymous attacks, through the news media. That public element is a sign you're in trouble, and it drains everybody's attention and energy and motivation. You lose some of your most talented people because nobody wants to live that way. Most people I work with who are stuck in high conflict, I'd say 80% of them want to get out, but they don't know how. And whether I'm talking to people in violent gang conflict or members of Congress and their staff, it's no different. The signature signs that you're in high conflict are if you start feeling contempt or disgust. Those are the most reliable predictors of divorce, as it turns out. And people can tell when you have contempt or disgust for them, even when you think you're hiding it. People feel that and they respond in kind, so it really escalates. Anger, on the other hand, is actually okay. Anger is a signal. And if you're angry with me, it probably means you want me to be different or better. But if you hate me, it means you've given up on me. And I can feel that. There are two forces that drive most high conflicts: humiliation and splitting. I call these forces fire starters because they take what could be a useful conflict and blow it up. Humiliation is when you feel publicly brought low. You were up here and you're brought here. The number one thing at work is to never diminish someone, especially in front of other people, in a way that goes to the core of how they see their own value. Humiliating your opponent is like handing them a trunk full of weapons. You can do it, just know it's probably going to make the conflict worse. As Nelson Mandela said, there's no one more dangerous than one who's been humiliated, even if you humiliate him rightly. Splitting is what humans do when they are frightened or uncertain. The more anxiety and fear in the air, the more likely we are to want to split the world cleanly into good and evil. And guess which side we're always on? So at work, we might routinely, without even realizing it, split each other into two camps, say. Maybe union workers versus management, or reporters versus editors, or nurses versus doctors. When this happens and those groups get too segregated, they don't know each other anymore, dysfunctional conflict is usually right around the corner. So the more you can do to mix up those groups, sometimes literally, the better. In some organizations I've worked with, they will have people rotate through different roles and divisions on purpose. Because when you go from one role to another, you suddenly have empathy for the people in that role. And it makes it a little bit harder to dismiss or demonize the other group when they go back. Healthy conflict is curious, flexible, and focused on solving a problem, not defeating your opponent. Healthy conflict can be uncomfortable, unpleasant, stressful, but you emerge from it understanding something you didn't know about yourself, the other person, or the world. There is a sense of movement instead of that feeling of being stuck. Instead of the same negative emotions over and over, you experience a whole galaxy of emotions, including negative emotions like frustration or anger, but also flashes of surprise or even humor. There is literally more movement in the conversation and inside you. There's a few things that healthy conflict workplaces have in common, in my experience. First of all, they tell stories about healthy conflicts from the past in the organization, especially to new employees. They tell about times when junior employees raised important disagreements, which takes courage, and it led to a way better outcome. Healthy conflict workplaces also encourage dissent by modeling what it looks like. So it's really important that the leaders of those organizations show the kind of behavior they want to see, which means flexibility, curiosity, forgiveness, grace, humor, all of those things that make people more comfortable saying the hard things in a way that actually leads to progress. The organizational psychologist Adam Grant has done some really cool research showing that if colleagues tell each other in advance of conflict what makes their blood boil at work, it can be a really helpful way to help us avoid landmines with each other that we don't even know about. And there's certain things that all of us have that really make us unreasonably crazy. Like for some people, it's missing deadlines. For other people, it's curt emails or telling them things they already know or circumventing them to make a decision. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to comply with those things, but it is really helpful to know where the landmines are. And then sometimes you can avoid them. In my company, which is very small, we have regular conflict meetings because we want to make sure that we created literally the space to talk about things that we're not sure about. Maybe we're not going in the right direction. Maybe we're saying yes to too many things. We need to literally have meetings that are just about that. Where are you torn? What are you worried about? There are questions we can ask each other that become normal. And that makes it easier to raise conflict before it is combustible. Healthy conflict at home can be even harder for a lot of people than healthy conflict at work, because home is where we most need to feel like someone has our back. It's really important to have healthy conflict that doesn't necessarily lead to a resolution, because there's always going to be things we disagree about in our families. But it's really important that we can make each other feel like we've heard each other, even as we continue to profoundly disagree. The research on healthy conflicts in families shows that they don't necessarily have fewer conflicts, but the conflicts that they do have leave them feeling closer, not further apart. One of the most powerful tools for cultivating a healthy conflict culture is what's known as the magic ratio. John and Julie Gottman, who have studied thousands of couples to understand relationship conflict better, have found that couples that have roughly 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative in conflict tend to be more resilient. They're able to have a sort of buffer for conflict so that it doesn't wound so easily. When I first heard this, I was like, oh my gosh, like that feels like a lot. How are we going to do this? But then I started realizing that there's a lot of small, fleeting interactions that we all have that could be more positive. And sometimes when we work with organizations, we ask them to do an audit of their ratio of positive to negative interactions. And this is where routines are so important, and rituals, right? Like, do we have weekly or daily things that we do that are more likely to build up that positive balance? Acknowledging someone who went above and beyond, or helping a coworker when it's not really required by your job. It can be remembering something that they're dealing with and texting them to ask how it went. Don't underestimate the importance of a note thanking someone, and be specific. What exactly are you thanking them for? Show them that you see them, the big things and the small things, especially once you know their conflict personality type. These are the small ways that we build connection and relationship, and that really matters. At home, the things you do to boost the magic ratio are going to depend on what your family members need most. Different people want or need different things. For some people, it's recognition, praise, words of affection. For other people, it's actions. It's doing favors for you. For some people, it's time, just spending time together. My husband routinely gets up much earlier than I do, right? So he has coffee like 5 a.m. and I get up later. And sometimes he will set the coffee maker so it's all ready and all I have to do is push go. And he puts a little Post-it note with a smiley face so I know. And it happens every so often. And I don't know why, but this just really makes me feel good. And I really appreciate it. For some people, it's fixing the leaky faucet that's driving them crazy but doesn't bother you at all. For other people, it's filling the dang dishwasher the way they like it. Going out to a nice dinner so nobody has to cook or clean up. Every one of these small acts matters. But what happens when conflict erupts before you're able to apply the 5-to-1 ratio? What do you do when conflict explodes out of nowhere? I want to tell you a story about what not to do in those situations. When I was riding on a city bus with my 9-year-old son a few years ago, there were two men, strangers, behind us who started fighting about whether the window should be open or closed. It escalated really fast, and I heard one of them say to the other, "I will cut you." And the other said, "Let's go." The full mama bear came out in me, and I turned around and just started yelling at them. I was like, "Can't you see there's a kid here? What is wrong with you?" And then we got off at the next stop. And then my son started yelling at me. It had really scared him to see me escalate the conflict in this way. Only later did I learn what I'd done wrong. I met a public city bus driver who has tried all kinds of tricks and tips for dealing with conflict and learned a lot through trial and error. And what he told me was that I basically broke every rule that he's learned. Here's what he does when conflict erupts on his city bus, which happens pretty much every day. First thing, he pulls the bus over and opens all the doors. In conflict, people need to know there's a way out. Even in high conflict, somewhere in your brain, some little voice is saying, how do I get myself out of this and still save face? So you need to give people an exit. And then he gets on the intercom and he asks them 2 questions. He'll say, "What's going on back there?" as if he really wants to know. And then when they start yelling back, he says, "What would you like to do about it?" And then he gives them a choice. Either one of you could come up here and keep me company and we can get everyone safely to their destination, or I'm gonna have to call someone and we're gonna have to wait. The analogy to opening the doors on the bus at home or at work is a question like, help me understand, how did we get here? You're taking a step back so everyone can take a breath. Or you might say, would it be okay if we took a break for about a half hour and came back? Those are really important ways to just interrupt that spiral. Always letting people know there's another path. When people feel trapped is when you get panic and antisocial behavior. It's best if the people in charge model this over and over. They ask for feedback, they take it in, they admit when they're wrong. That tells everyone else that the stakes are not necessarily life or death. It's okay. The most important thing you can do in many conflicts is take ownership over your contribution to that conflict. Sometimes in, say, a work conflict, taking ownership might mean realizing the ways in which your earlier silence has allowed something to go down a path that probably was not a good idea. It doesn't mean it's all your fault, but it does mean that usually in most groups, conflict is a system. And even though you can't control anyone else, the one thing you can control is yourself. And if you change your behavior a little bit, it does disrupt the equilibrium and have ripple effects on the whole conflict. Taking ownership means realizing we're all in this together. And sometimes my mistake was a very small one, but if I can acknowledge it, then it makes it easier for other people to do the same. Social capital is the currency of human connection. It's the thing that makes us feel seen, it makes us feel less alone. So many companies are under so much time pressure or they're working remotely that the balance sheet has gotten really out of whack. You need to spend more intentional time than ever building up this social capital with each other in ways that are genuine. Find something, anything you can connect on that maybe isn't about work. Maybe you both have a dog or you both love to garden. Those are really important touch points to come back to, especially if you work remotely. Here's the golden rule when navigating conflict. Conflict feels like a failure, but it's usually a starting point. I hope that now that we've gotten to the end of this class, you feel some sense of possibility where maybe you didn't before. I hope that you realize that there are these hidden openings in conflict and traps also. And you're not alone, and you're not the first person to go through this, and you're not the last. But understanding how humans behave in conflict can help us at least see the traps before we get stuck. You now have the tools to recognize what's happening in the first 5 minutes of a conflict, to understand what makes conflict turn destructive, to identify the conflict personality driving the problem, and to listen in a way that can genuinely change the direction of a conversation very quickly. Maybe you came into this class thinking that conflict is something that happens to you. Now you know it's something that you can shape. Conflict is gonna find you. It always does. But the next time you feel that familiar heat rising, in a meeting, at home, online, you'll have choices you didn't have before. That's not a small thing. That's everything.